and you talk about, you've mentioned this person who was a mentor to you, and we talk frequently about with our associates about trying to find mentors or sponsors or somebody to push you forward who's in a more senior position. So I guess that's something that translates as well, whether you're in a house or not. That having,
yeah,
like, you know, and it sounds though that for you it was more of a coincidence.
it was. And I have to say, except for kind of one mentor I've had where I actually went and asked this person if they could be a mentor, it's always been, even for sponsors, and I have only had probably one or two sponsors in my life. It really has been just a relationship that's developed. And so whenever I mentor somebody, I always say, keep an open mind. I heard someone say this, and I've been using this, is look for people who like you. I mean, if you are at a
Yes.
meeting or something and there are people in the organization, your level senior, if they like you and they, you can feel a connection, stay close to that person. You never know who can help who. My one of my sponsor that I'm, most grateful for, we were colleagues. So she had just moved to Toronto. I had just started as counsel at the job. And we both have a very quirky sense of humor. She and I kind of joke like you and I do, Lisa, and just, she would say something just, just funny, wry, smart, what. And I just think that's great. So we would always kind of laugh. We became, I think, friends, really good colleagues. And she just was an amazing woman, skyrocketed. She ended up retiring as CEO. But because we had that connection, because she trusted me, she liked my work, she, would always promote me. And there are situations where, I would be given a role and maybe my compensation wasn't right. She fought for it. When I was in the US and ready to move back to Canada, she came to me and said, I think you can do a job that's not legal, and I'm going to, create this operations role for you. I want you to do this for us. And just really kind of paved the way for me to really excel. And that it wasn't something deliberate I did. It was just a connection. We had a good connection. We worked well together, and that's how these things happen. And I think we as women, we can really help each other out that way. And it was, again, something very special in my life that I appreciate very much.
Yeah, it's probably the most important thing that a woman can do for another woman in an organization, particularly when so many of the people with whom you work are not women, is to try and find someone like that with whom you have a personal connection, who also can assist you in sort of navigating the route that you're taking. And I imagine that it's even more difficult when you're a woman of diversity, right? Like that, like in an organization. And so I want to talk a little bit about diversity and equity and inclusion and the role that that's played in your career. And then I want to talk a little bit more about how we can, how women in law firms can promote diversity and inclusion, how important it is to you now when you look at outside law firms. There's a whole range of issues there that I would like to talk to you about.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, so maybe we can just start with that. The impact that your being a racialized lawyer has had on your career trajectory. Let's just start there.
Yeah, absolutely. So here's what I would say, and I think a lot of people, minorities will say this, visible minorities, and I think women as well. When you're in a situation where you are the only or one of few, it can be challenging, but even more challenging when you're dealing with people who've just never dealt with someone who looks like you, other than what they've seen on TV. So, if you're a woman in a room of men who've never worked with women, they're going to be very reluctant to talk to you for what it's fear of the unknown is what I like to call it. So
the practice of law is exactly the way it is on TV, don't you think?
100%.
Right? Like
can you do that around me?
With a problem, and then the next day you're in court. That's the way it always.
Didn't you love those shows? I could never watch them. I'd just be pounding the table. It was just too frustrating. So, I would find I'd go into a room and suddenly people, don't want to look me in the eye, or, there's a conversation happening and you're excluded from it. And there are a whole range of emotions. You get angry, frustrated. And I think the key thing is to think about why. What's happening? What's going through that person's head? And the more I thought about it and talked to other people, did some reading, there really is a sense of the fear of the unknown. I think about a lot of the people I first started working with had probably never been in that close of proximity to somebody of my color in their lives, which you think shouldn't matter. But if you don't know anything about someone who looks like me, and all you know is what you see on TV, which is not always positive, it can be negative, it can be downright scary. Then those are the tapes that are playing in your head as you're dealing with me, and
Yep.
that obviously is going to have a negative impact on how you work with me, the type of work you give me, how you judge that work. I mean, I could go on about this forever. There was a very interesting study, and I can't remember the name of it, but if you kind of Google the facts, you'll come up with it in the US. There's a research institute that did a study on discrimination in law firms. And what they did is they took a student paper, a student memo, and part of it was right, part of it was wrong. It was the exact same memo. And they asked a bunch of law firms to grade the paper. And under the guise that they were marking students, do you know this? Do you know the study? That they were marking student papers. I'll speed up my story, but they were marking student papers. 50% of the lawyers who were asked to look at this paper were told that the writer was a white male. 50% of the lawyers who were asked to grade the paper were told it was a black male. The gradings were, I mean, it's horrific. So basically, the white male got served, say, 8 out of 10. The black male got 4 out of 10. The same sentence that say was wrong on the white male's paper was, he could improve. It was, good, some things to improve. The other person, well, what are they doing in law school? Should they even be here? This is horrific. The exact same paper. And that to me is a stark example of the type of bias and discrimination that racialized lawyers are facing.
Yeah.
And, you hear this, my parents used to say this all the time, you have to work 2 times, 3 times as hard. You really do. And that's not just to make sure that you're as perfect as you can be with your work. For me, it was also getting to know people and getting people to know me, getting people to understand that we have more similarities than we do differences. But that's exhausting. And, there are lots of studies about this, about the mental toll it takes on lawyers, and it does. You sometimes there are things you would, you want to talk about, things that are impacting your life, but you're not going to bring that up because it's something that people won't understand or they may judge incorrectly. And you have to spend most of the time trying to figure out where to find that common ground. And that, as I say, takes a toll on racialized lawyers. And as I say, I think women have had a similar experience as well.
Yeah. And so as a racialized lawyer giving advice to law firms, not lawyers, but law firms about what they can do to improve in this category, what kind of advice would you give them?
Well, I think it really starts with having the conversations at senior levels. And they're going to be uncomfortable conversations because they get very personal. You come to a point where you actually have to look inside yourself and say, what biases do I have? Conscious, unconscious, whatever. I think it's a constant conversation and challenging of that. I think a lot of us, opening up something that we have, whether it's our practice or our corporation, to people we don't know that we're uncomfortable with, it can be scary. You have to just allow yourself to be vulnerable, to acknowledge those feelings and just do it. And I think the other thing is leaders of organizations have to be accountable. It's got to be part of your business plan, like it is, like any other piece of your business plan is. If there's not an accountability at the senior level, it's not going to happen. And I think a lot of organizations are taking a bit of a soft approach to it. You just can't. It's got to be, if it's something you want to do as a business, just like you want to do any transformation, any strategy, it's got to be part of your business plan. There have to be key metrics attached to it, not numbers, and you have to execute on them. But it's a lot of work and it's a lot of introspective conversation that can be difficult. And I think including racialized people will help have those conversations with the lawyers in your organization. Encourage them to get involved. Reach out to the community. I mean, there are lots of writers, lots of dialogue happening about this outside of law. Lots of organizations that are doing it right. How can we leverage those? Like open up the firm and have a conversation in the community. It's amazing what you learn.
Yeah, that's so interesting. I find that in a lot of firms, particularly firms of a certain size, that the senior management of the firm likes to delegate the responsibility to like a committee.
Yes.
And then the committee's responsible for creating initiatives or finding ways to promote EDI within the organization. I'm not really sure. I think that's a great way to handle it. I appreciate that the managing partner can't handle everything, but still, it seems to me to be like a really important thing. Um, and I don't know, like, there's been a lot of talk in our legal community about like sort of the way we hire people out of law schools and finding new ways to hire to promote EDI. I don't know if you have any thoughts on that.
Um, yeah, look, I think we end up sort of going to the same well all the time.
Yeah.
I've worked with a lot of firms where I've kind of helped them with hiring practices. We've done reverse mentorship. We call it reverse mentorship. So we're working with one law firm right now where we have a Black in-house counsel initiative in Canada. And so it's a group of Black in-house counsel across the
Yeah.
country, mostly in Toronto, but across the country. And this firm had talked about the fact that they had a couple of junior associates who were Black, but the feedback they were getting is they weren't being mentored and sponsored. And so we said, well, we'll do it. We've got work to give. We've got senior in-house counsel who can talk to these lawyers about, what do we want from you as external counsel? How do we
Mhm.
want you to communicate with us and work with us? And that's a way they can learn and get exposure to clients if they're not getting it at the firm. So we're literally just in the early stages of launching this. But I think work with your in-house counsel. I think there's
Yeah.
more diversity. We're seeing more diversity and inclusion in the in-house counsel space, certainly with women. We see far more women in senior roles at companies in legal than we do at firms. And I think it's the same thing with racialized lawyers. There's a group there I think that can help firms, and I would encourage firms to reach out to understand how did I, a lot of firms will say, well, we can't find people, and I'd say every team I've had has been diverse, and I was able to find them. So it's
Yeah.
just a matter of expanding where you're looking and how you're looking and how you bring people into the firm and how you acclimate them at the firm. All those things need to be reviewed.
Yeah, that's a very valuable piece of advice because I think a lot of us look inside to figure out ways to improve our EDI metrics or whatever. We don't think as much about looking outside to find assistance in that regard. I think that's a really helpful piece of advice. The other thing that's happened and is and particularly in the context of the pandemic, um, I think that, women in particular have been disadvantaged by um, the impact of the pandemic. I don't know if you have any thoughts on that as well.
Absolutely. I socialize with a small group of professional women. We've just been talking to each other through the pandemic and specifically on issues of, how this has impacted us as women. And one story I heard from somebody was that a very senior kind of up and coming business woman in business had ended up resigning because she had small children and just a concern about back to school and the kids needing support. And she thought she needed to focus on that. And this senior woman was saying, like, they were just scrambling with, yeah, how do we help this woman out? At the fact that this woman felt that her only avenue was to actually walk away from her career for a short period of time. And I think we do need to be creative. In that situation, I heard later they were able to find project work for this woman to do that would keep her in the business, give her some flexibility, just so she wasn't completely walking away. But I think, in families where there is if there's a woman in the family, the woman ends up being the person that takes on the responsibility of the home,
Yep.
and that responsibility has gone fourfold due to COVID, due to the pandemic. The other
Yeah.
issue is that, there aren't as many senior women, not where we need to be. And so when we start thinking about layoffs or shrinkage in the economy, and unfortunately, it's disproportionately impacting women.
Yeah.
Uh,
It doesn't, the statistics are alarming,
yeah,
right? Like it doesn't look too positive.
no,
Um, and it is frustrating because even as I don't know how you describe it, but even as an empowered woman, like I can tell you that Like my husband cannot do the food shopping. And I don't know if it's passive aggressive
Yeah.
or if it's a real thing,
Yeah.
but it means that I have to do it in addition to whatever else I have to do. Although I will say that generally speaking, he's been a good partner. And I do talk to my lawyers often about having not just a partner, but a support system, right? That's going to enable you to perform the professional functions that you have to perform, and with the time, which are so time consumptive.
Yeah, and I think that support system is huge. I mean, I don't have children at school age, but my younger sister does. She has three kids, ranging from 8 to 15, and she's working full time. And so we've, which thankfully she lives very close to me. And she one day kind of reached out to me and I said, well, Karen, I'm at home now. So, I can't take care of the 8-year-old, but the 15-year-old we can throw him in the living room and he can do his work there and it gives you a break. And so I think reaching out and not being afraid to reach out to family, friends, and just say, I need help, and spouses, and I think
Yeah,
as women, we don't always say, I need help. We want to do it all. We
yeah,
see it as, I know for me, sometimes just saying I need help is a sign of like I can't handle it, and we just have to learn to say that, like, I need help and I need you to do, like my spouse, you got to just tell him, I need you to do this and spell it out five, the 5 points that he needs to do, and he'll do it. So that's something I'm just learning to do.
yeah, I understand that. I learned that when I first sent my husband to do the food shopping, and he came home with food for the kids' lunches, which included things like star fruit because he thought they looked interesting. And I thought, well, you know what? My kids want a banana. That's as interesting as it gets. So I learned quickly that if I am going to send him to do that task, I can't put down fruit.
Yeah.
Right? I have to be very specific about
Yeah.
what it is I want to, I want to achieve out of that.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So I
No, I hear
suppose
you.
we've all had that experience where, although I will say, and I talked about this a lot with other women, that, one of the traits that we talk about as professional women, the things that most important is to be able to keep a whole bunch of balls in the air, right? But I talk a lot about the fact that I routinely drop one of the five. Let's say there are five in the air, right? And I've tried not to feel too badly about that. I don't know if that's the same for you.
Oh yeah. I think most of us that have reached the senior levels, we're perfectionists, we're type A's. That's kind of
Yeah,
what ends up getting us there. And I think as women, I will say as a person of color, this whole notion of you've got to work 2 or 3 times as hard to keep it all together. We do end up juggling a whole bunch of stuff, the family responsibility, you're
yeah,
doing volunteer work. A lot of us are doing things outside of our profession. You're doing all of the things you want to do in the profession, mentoring, sponsoring. It's a lot. And I've done the same thing. I've missed a meeting, or you're missing a deadline, and I think especially in this time, you just have to give yourself a break. That's where the delegation thing comes in handy. So I'm doing a lot of volunteer work. I've kind of dragged. I have a articling student we have a lawyer professional program. We have an articling student with us, and I said to her, "This is going to be great learning for you. You're going to be involved in this volunteer work with me," and she's actually really loved it. I think I feel a bit guilty because I've kind of just voluntold her to do it, but I think it's been good learning for her. And I think looking for other ways to delegate, to get help, and just giving yourself a break, which is half the battle. And
yeah,
I know for me, it's the thing about saying no. Like I can't do this right now. I have to default to that because my default is always, yep, I can handle it. Yep, leave it with me. And I have to default to no, I can't. Here's a solution, but it's not going to be me. And that's not easy.
yeah. It really isn't. Although I will say this, that despite having a lot of balls in the air, I do find that the volunteer work, um, makes a emotional difference to me in my life that's important in my profession, right? And
Yeah.
and you can cut that up a whole bunch of different ways, in terms of advice, whether it's advice to take on some, not-for-profit obligations, or to carve some time out for yourself every day to exercise, or whatever it is. I find that it's been very important for me to find different ways to balance, you know,
100%. Yeah, I think you could get very caught up in all of this. And I liked what you said about volunteer. A lot of people will think I talk to my sister about this all the time because she'll say, I have no time to volunteer in the community. And I say, Karen,
yeah,
you're raising three amazing kids. That's your volunteer service.
yeah,
You're raising amazing human beings that they're gonna do great for our community. And that's volunteer work too. But I think it just puts things in perspective. A quick
yes,
story. When I lived in Chicago for 3 years and looking for ways to just connect to a community when you come in, when you move somewhere, you just don't know anybody. I think at a certain age, it's hard. You're not going to bars or hanging out, it's not like school. And I just wasn't connecting with a lot of people and a lot of people in the profession. And there was a legal clinic that was doing, they were working with people who had sort of minor offenses, minor criminal records, but that was preventing them from, learning a trade or getting a job. And so what this legal clinic would do was help people either expunge the record, get rid of the record, or just ways to help them kind of get a job. And so I don't know anything about criminal work, but they just sort of train you to help you fill out paperwork and just get the process going. But through that, I met so many amazing people with amazing stories. And it really taught me, just getting to know people. It's not always what you see on paper.
And that concludes part 2 of Lisa's interview with Terrie-Lynne. Please continue on to part 3, our final video in the series.